I'm Stephen Rick. I'm the Senior Service Designer at ECITB, which is the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board. I was brought into the organisation around 18 months ago now, right in the midst of the COVID pandemic, when training wasn't really happening for a lot of people. And as a training board, we hadn't really moved to online delivery of things. They'd started using some of the tools that were out there, such as Adobe Classrooms and some Zoom communication. But actually thinking about building from the ground up, where it's a real blended mix, was really important. We've decided to go on the blended rather than full e-learning side, is because people still need that communication inside a classroom, and it's very hard to replicate practical skills online, as we all know, especially in those types of industries. One of the first things that we wanted to test was being able to source lots of different content from different places and build a pathway of learning. So one of the standards that we were working to was the digital security standard, in trying to help people understand why it's important to look out for phishing emails and all those different things. I've watched, there's plenty of different parts of e-learning out there, but they're not quite stitched together to cover this full standard that I was looking to create. So what we did with You Filtered was start to define what type of content we'd need to find. And it came about there was around 30 to 35 pieces of content that would actually map alongside the standard. And what we did was build a course, an online course that can be done in around 3.5 to 4 hours, where you can take all that full understanding but actually work towards a national standard alongside it. We're custodians of standards, so what we normally go through is we look after the standard, build the standard. So we talk to lots of people in industry and get to understand what they'd like to see made up as part of that standard. We create that standard, and then we then start to work with our training providers, and we allow it for them to start building courses next to it. So they have to then come into approval to us, and once they're then approved through our board, then the training providers can then deliver against it. But actually we have no control then over how that standard is delivered. Any standardization in resources that are being used, they're all different ones. What we've been able to do on doing it this way around is we've been able to create that standardization of resource and give it to our providers to be able to deliver on their behalf. That means that we've got good standardization of learning, but it also means that we can do rapid development and rapid deployment against things as well, whilst also providing resource, which we've not been able to do before. We can now look at the data where people start falling off throughout any of these qualifications or pieces of learning, and we can see if somebody starts dropping off. If we can see multiple people start dropping off after the third or fourth piece of micro bite-sized learning, we can start looking at that one individual piece of resource and swap it out to hopefully help those people continue on that learning journey. But also it means we can keep up to date really quickly. So if a standard changes, or if a new piece of government legislation comes out around GDPR or something like that inside the digital passport, we can replace it on the same day rather than having to roll it out over multiple months. Platform's always important for people to access, but actually content and curation is the most important thing. There's no point bringing somebody to somewhere if people don't engage with the content. And having engaging content, you have to go through a lot of curation to get there. So yes, curation does sit at the top of the tree. Multiple places, but obviously the use of content intelligence is really important. So bringing all those different resources, being able to map skills against it, it gives us a real hit list straight away. We also take recommendations from the industry and from the people who are taking those courses, and then we can start looking at those pieces of content and start vetting them and verify them and make sure they're up to date, that they're in line with industry. So in the long run, the content game and the curation game. It's going to go on forever. There's no start and end to it. You've always got to be on top of it, and it's about just managing your library correctly. The only way to build good pathways of good curated content is by knowing the customer that's going to go through it. I think, education has changed a lot in the last 10 years, 10, 15 years. And a lot of that has happened because of the internet and because of social media and the way that people communicate with each other, and now being able to do most things on a mobile phone rather than anything else. And I know those types of things we've been talking about for years, but actually it's completely true. People will jump to a mobile phone before they'll walk in their classroom. So thinking about those different pieces and understanding how your learner is going to engage with things, we've got to stop thinking about designing for chalk and talk that most of us would have been used to going through an education system. People like variety of choice. People have different learning styles. So eventually, in the content catalogue that we're looking to build alongside all these different courses that we're going to create over the next few years, we'd like to have 3 or 4 different variations of the same content. So it might be content on digital security, maybe a video, it might be a podcast, it could be a read article through a blogging platform, all saying the same thing, all delivering the same output, but it allows the learner to understand it in the way that they want to consume it. And actually turning those tables around from teacher knowing best to learner wanting to know more is the most important part. You can't assume anything. Engagement's critical. And it's critical because, as I mentioned before, what would be the point if we put it in old terms? If we built a new library and we put 10,000 books in it, but then nobody ever walked through the door, then you've just wasted 10,000 books. Actually, you might as well build something where people want to come and they want to engage with that content. Actually, had this through the Digital Passport when we was building it. There were 4 or 5 really great articles on the web, but unfortunately there were too many jump-off points inside those articles. Because they're from trusted sources, they were, trying to get people to sign up for PhD programs and different courses halfway through the article. Now, what we could have done is we could have just lifted that copy and referred to it and dropped it into the LXP or the LMS as a learning pathway. But we wanted to make it a little bit more engaging. And actually, what we decided to do was strip out some of those key pieces of learning that needed to be undertaken, and we built little 1 to 2 minute videos of that article and referred to the original article in those videos. What that does is it took what was a 5-6 minute article with lots of jump off points, which could be distracting for anybody who's trying to go through the Digital Passport, and actually kept them inside the Digital Passport, but reduced the content time as well. It's about supporting creation. It's great. We're so fortunate. We're in a time now where we can literally get on a computer in the morning and not understand a thing and walk away 5 minutes later completely understanding something because of the likes of YouTube, because of the likes of Forbes, because of the likes of McKinsey. All that information's there, but it doesn't mean that the way that it is put across in their material is right for your core audience. You've just got to think about how your audience is likely to engage, and you can be creative about how you take that information that you've gained and put it in front of other people. When we released that Digital Passport, we noticed that on, I think it was asset 7 of 32, that actually people were getting to that point and then stopping. The reason they were stopping, we believe, is actually it was just too long a video for them. It was actually a TED talk at 16 minutes, and we put that in there for a little bit of variation. There is only that one TED talk in there. The rest of the videos are between 2 to 5 minutes, and the articles are no longer than 3 or 4 minute reads. What it's helped do is actually prove that we need to keep even closer to that micro bite-sized learning content. And actually, it was just a video on passwords and how to build a strong password. And we can get that information across in literally 1 minute if we want to. So that's what we started to do, is we started to create content that delivered the same amount of impact, but in 1 minute rather than 18-minute TED video. The TED video is very, very good, but it was probably just too long and too in depth for our core audience at that time. The other thing that we can do with that data set, though, is we can start to see different cohorts of learners and how they're progressing through. So we can see that people do it all in one fell swoop. We can see that people that come in 5 minutes every day. We can see people who have done it in a classroom. We can see people who have done it outside of a classroom. And that becomes really important in when we start thinking about what we create or what we curate going forward. So when we start thinking outside of classroom and people are doing it 5 minutes between 8 and 5 minutes past 8 in the morning, they're likely to be traveling somewhere, or they're studying, they're having their breakfast or something like that. So they're likely to be on a mobile phone. Therefore, we've got to find content that's easily consumable on a mobile phone rather than sat at a laptop or a desk. We're in a slightly strange position because this is all new for the organisation that I'm working at. So obviously there's been cost associated at this front end, because there was no platform in place and there was no content in place, etc., etc. So at the minute, we're probably on about par what it would cost to actually go and build a resources for qualifications. Probably a little bit over, slightly, not much. But actually going forward is where those cost savings really come in. Because when you start having a content catalogue or a resource catalogue, you have to build it in refresh time. So in 4 or 5 years time, we have to go back to every resource, make sure it's all up to date, that all the standards are working. One thing that people never really build into those types of things is wages and time spent of people doing those things. So to go through a PowerPoint, for example, that is 50 to 100 slides long, is going to take somebody with industry knowledge anywhere between 1 day to a week to do. Now, if you take the average wage of most people, realistically, that's probably going to cost £1,500–2,000 to do each time. Now, imagine you've got that, but you've got 2,000 courses or 2,000 pieces of resources. You can see that scaling up quite quickly in cost, and that is just looking after your catalogue. When we go into using other people's content, other people's catalogues, that obviously reduces cost burden in time, but also it means that the refresh is built on their end side. On top of that, when you've got things like content intelligence that is always rating through the algorithms, we can then say, well, actually, this one's been superseded because this one's more relevant and more fresh than this one that we were using 2 years ago. So going forward, I can see it saving thousands of pounds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds. As an organisation, we're predicting that over the next 4 years or so, we will save in the region, or we will divert funds in the region of around £1 million. The main thing is you are freeing up people to go and do what they go and be more creative. We, as people, we can quite easily get boxed off into doing certain things on a daily basis, but actually that's the whole point of Industry 4.0, is where those things can be automated and it can allow humans to go away and be that creative person again. That's what we should be doing. In education, we quite often wrap ourselves up to be educationalists and to be set in stone in doing one thing a certain way. Most people in education are actually really creative people. And actually, we've just been told to think in certain ways. Actually, this allows us to go back to that more creative thinking, to be more efficient, to be more effective, because we're all here to do one thing, which is to help people understand more knowledge and to take more knowledge transfer away. And if we can do that quicker, smarter, more cheaply, then that's great, because it means we can hit more people.